Wyoming Territory, 1885. Abigail Barstow hadn't intended to slam the mercantile door so hard that the bell nearly flew off its mounting, but April winds and Sweetwater had their own ideas. She wrestled the heavy oak door closed, pressing her back against it while clutching her bonnet to keep it from becoming the next tumbleweed racing down Main Street. "Land's sakes, Abigail. I thought we were under attack," Martha Stillwell called from behind the counter, her round face flushed from the morning's inventory. "Sorry, Martha. The wind has a mind of its own today." Abigail straightened her sensible navy dress, smoothing the wrinkles that had formed during her brisk walk from the schoolhouse. At 42, Abigail had long ago abandoned frivolous fashion in favor of practicality, just as she'd abandoned other frivolous notions, like romance. "Well, it brought you in just in time. The supply wagon arrived early, and I've got those McGuffey readers you ordered." Martha disappeared into the storeroom, her voice trailing behind her. "And that new gentleman who bought the old Harker place was asking after you." Abigail's spine stiffened. "What new gentleman?" Martha emerged with a crate of books. "Mr. York Lancaster. Quite handsome for a man of, well, I'd say he's about your age, maybe a few years older. Came in yesterday, asking where the schoolmarm lived." "And why would he do that?" Abigail asked, though she already knew the answer. The school board was likely recruiting another advocate for their cause, finding Abigail a husband before she withered away completely, as Chairman Wilson had so tactfully put it. "Said he has a nephew who'll be needing schooling come fall. Wanted to meet the teacher." Martha's eyes twinkled with mischief that made Abigail immediately suspicious. "I see." Abigail ran her finger along a shelf of canned peaches. "And did you tell him where to find me?" "Of course not. I told him you'd be in town today." Martha's smile grew wider. "I expect he'll turn up any minute now." As if summoned by Martha's prediction, the door swung open, admitting another gust of wind and a tall figure in a weather-worn duster. The man removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair and sun-weathered features that spoke of years under open skies. His eyes, the deep blue of twilight, found Abigail's immediately. "Miss Barstow." His voice carried the rough texture of the frontier, but softened around the edges of her name. "Mrs. Barstow," she corrected reflexively, though she'd been widowed so long that the title sometimes felt like a fiction. James had been gone 18 years now, carried away by influenza before they'd even celebrated their 3rd anniversary. The stranger's brow furrowed momentarily. "I beg your pardon, Mrs. Barstow." "York Lancaster." He extended a calloused hand. "I recently acquired the Harker property east of town." Abigail accepted his handshake, noting the gentle pressure despite his obvious strength. "So I've heard, Mr. Lancaster. Martha tells me you were asking after me." His smile came easy, crinkling the corners of those remarkable eyes. "My nephew will be joining me in September. Boy's 15, smart as a whip but wild as a Mustang. I wanted to meet the teacher who'll have the challenge of educating him." "I see." Abigail retrieved her hand, which had lingered perhaps a moment too long in his. "Well, Mr. Lancaster, I've been teaching in Sweetwater for 16 years. I've encountered plenty of wild colts in my classroom and managed to gentle most of them." "I don't doubt it for a moment, Mrs. Barstow." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her glance away first. Martha, who had been pretending to organize shelves nearby while eavesdropping shamelessly, suddenly called out, "Abigail, could you help me with these heavier items before you go? My back is troubling me something awful today." "Of course, Martha." Turning back to York, she nodded politely. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Lancaster." "Actually," he said, removing his gloves, "I was hoping you might allow me to escort you home afterward. There are some matters regarding my nephew's education I'd like to discuss further." Before Abigail could formulate a refusal, Martha interjected, "What a lovely idea. These spring winds are treacherous, Abigail. You nearly blew away coming in. A gentleman's arm would steady you nicely on the return journey." Abigail shot Martha a look that promised retribution. "Thank you for your concern, but I've managed to navigate Sweetwater's weather for many years without assistance." York's expression remained placid, but something in his eyes, a flash of challenge, perhaps, caught her attention. "I've no doubt you're capable, Mrs. Barstow. I'm merely offering courtesy, not rescue." The distinction made her pause. Most men in Sweetwater treated her as either a fragile widow to be protected or a spinster to be pitied. This stranger seemed to offer neither sentiment. "Very well, Mr. Lancaster. I'll accept your escort, but only because I do have questions about your nephew's previous schooling. Martha's triumphant smile behind York's back made Abigail wonder what she'd just agreed to. An hour later, they walked side by side down Sweetwater's main street, the wind having mellowed to occasional gusts that sent dust devils spinning between buildings. York carried her parcel of books despite her protests. "So you came to Wyoming from Virginia after the war?" Abigail asked, having extracted this much information during their walk. York nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Left in '66. Couldn't stomach what the war had done to the place. Or to me." He glanced at her. "I'm not proud of the side I fought for, if you're wondering." "I wasn't," she said, though she had been. "War makes complicated choices for everyone." "That's charitable of you." His smile flickered briefly. "What about you? Martha mentioned you've been in Sweetwater quite some time." "Since '69. James, my husband, brought us west for his health, ironically enough. He died our first winter here." She kept her voice matter-of-fact, the grief long since worn smooth like a river stone. "I'm sorry for your loss." It was a lifetime ago. They had reached the white picket fence surrounding her modest cottage at the edge of town. Abigail stopped at the gate. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Lancaster. But I should warn you, if your nephew is coming to my school, he'll be treated no differently than any other student." York handed over her parcel. "I wouldn't expect otherwise. In fact, I'd be disappointed if you did." His direct gaze unsettled her. Most men in Sweetwater had long ago stopped looking at Abigail as a woman. She was the schoolmarm, a fixture like the church steeple or the smithy's anvil. "Good day, Mr. Lancaster." She turned toward her gate. "Mrs. Barstow." His voice stopped her. "Would you consider joining me for supper at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening? To discuss my nephew's education further, of course." Abigail turned back slowly. "Mr. Lancaster, I appreciate the invitation, but I think we've covered all the necessary details regarding your nephew. Besides, Sweetwater is a small town with an active gossip mill. Two unmarried people dining together would create quite a stir. I'm well acquainted with small towns and their peculiarities." His eyes held a hint of amusement. "Perhaps I should clarify that my interest extends beyond my nephew's education." The directness of his statement caught her off guard. "Mr. Lancaster, I'm 42 years old. Whatever you're implying, I'm 47 myself, Mrs. Barstow. At our age, time seems too precious to waste on excessive formalities." "At our age," she echoed, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "We should know better than to indulge in sentimentality." Something in his expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Is that what you think I'm offering? Sentiment? I don't know what you're offering, Mr. Lancaster, and frankly, I'm not interested in finding out." She opened her gate with more force than necessary. "I'm too old for courtship games." "Age has nothing to do with it," he replied quietly. "And I don't play games, Mrs. Barstow. Good day, Mr. Lancaster." This time she didn't look back as she walked up the path to her front door. That evening, as Abigail sat at her kitchen table grading arithmetic papers, her mind kept returning to York Lancaster's unexpected invitation. It had been years since a man had expressed interest in her. Genuine interest, not the half-hearted matchmaking attempts of well-meaning townsfolk. "Ridiculous," she muttered, marking a subtraction error with perhaps more vigor than required. "The man barely knows me." A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Visitors were rare in the evening, especially on a school night. Cautiously, she approached the door, oil lamp in hand. "Who is it?" "Vera Thomas, Abigail." "May I come in?" Abigail sighed with relief and opened the door to the town's midwife and one of her few close friends. "I saw the lamp burning and thought I'd stop by on my way home from the Petersons." Vera swept in, unwrapping her shawl. "New baby girl, healthy as can be, though Hannah had a long labor." "That's wonderful news," Abigail said, genuinely pleased. She set a kettle on the stove for tea. "How many does that make for them now?" "5. Hannah says she's quite finished." Vera settled at the table, her keen eyes taking in the scattered papers. "Working late again?" "You know, all work and no play makes for a well-educated town," Abigail finished dryly. "Someone has to ensure these children can cipher properly." Vera chuckled. "Speaking of men who can cipher, I hear you were seen walking with York Lancaster today." Abigail groaned. "News travels faster than light in this town." "So it's true then?" Vera leaned forward eagerly. "He escorted me home from the mercantile." He has a nephew who'll be attending school in the fall. Abigail busied herself with the tea preparation, avoiding Vera's knowing gaze. And did this educational discussion require him to look at you like you hung the moon? Abigail nearly dropped the teacup. Don't be absurd. The man barely knows me. That didn't stop James from falling head over heels for you the moment he saw you, as I recall. That was different. We were young. And now you're not. So what? Your heart stopped beating. Vera accepted the tea Abigail handed her. York Lancaster is a fine-looking man with, from what I hear, a prosperous cattle operation starting up. Widowed, no children of his own. Seems like Providence might be giving you a second chance. I'm too old for second chances, Vera. Abigail settled across from her friend. I'm too old for love. Vera's eyes softened. No one is too old for love, Abigail. Not until they're in the ground. And even then, I have my doubts. Abigail shook her head. Love is for young people with futures ahead of them. I have my students, my home, my friends. It's enough. Is it? Vera sipped her tea. You know, York came to me last week about medicines for his ranch. We got a talking. He's an interesting man. Fought for the Confederacy but freed his family's slaves before the war even started, nursed Union and Confederate soldiers alike in prison camps. Man seen the worst of humanity and somehow kept his compassion. Why are you telling me this? Because he asked about you, Abigail. Not casual questions, either. Wanted to know if you were happy here, if you had family nearby, if you'd ever considered remarrying. Heat rose to Abigail's cheeks. That's rather presumptuous of him. Is it? Or is it the action of a man who knows what he wants and doesn't want to waste time? Vera set down her cup. Not everyone gets a second chance at happiness, Abigail. Some of us only get the one shot. Her expression clouded briefly with the memory of her own husband, lost to mine collapse 12 years earlier. After Vera left, Abigail found herself standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, really looking at herself for the first time in years. The auburn hair she'd once been proud of now showed threads of silver at the temples. Fine lines fanned from the corners of her gray eyes and bracketed her mouth. Not old, precisely, but certainly no longer young. This is foolishness, she told her reflection. One conversation with a stranger doesn't change anything. But as she prepared for bed, she couldn't help wondering what York Lancaster had seen when he looked at her that made him extend that invitation. The next morning brought a fresh complication in the form of a small package delivered by young Tommy Wilson just as school was letting out. Mr. Lancaster asked me to bring this to you, Miss Barstow, the 10-year-old announced, presenting a brown paper parcel tied with string. Said it was important school business. Thank you, Tommy. Abigail accepted the package, ignoring the curious stares of her remaining students. Once alone, she untied the string to find a book, a collection of Walt Whitman poems, with a note tucked inside the cover. Mrs. Barstow, I hope you'll forgive the presumption. These words have kept me company on many lonely nights under western skies. Perhaps they might persuade you to reconsider my invitation? Respectfully, York Lancaster. Abigail opened to where a pressed wildflower marked a page and read, Youth, large, lusty, loving. Youth full of grace, force, fascination. Do you know that old age may come after you with equal grace, force, fascination? Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the book. Such a gesture would have seemed ridiculous coming from another man. But something about York Lancaster's directness made it feel sincere rather than theatrical. Still, she had no intention of accepting his invitation. The last thing she needed was to become the subject of town gossip, or worse, to open herself to disappointment. She had built a calm, purposeful life in Sweetwater, a life that had no room for disruption, no matter how intriguing the source. She was still holding the book when a knock came at the schoolhouse door. Hastily, she tucked it into her desk drawer before opening the door to find Eliza Wilson, the school board chairman's wife and Sweetwater's most dedicated matchmaker. Abigail, dear, I just heard the most interesting news. Eliza swept in without invitation, her elaborate hat bobbing with each step. Is it true that York Lancaster has asked you to dinner? Abigail blinked. How could you possibly know that? So it is true. Eliza clasped her gloved hands together. Oh, this is wonderful. York mentioned his interest when he met with the board about his property taxes yesterday, but Franklin thought he was just being polite. He discussed me with the school board? Abigail felt heat rising to her face. Not in any improper way, Eliza hastened to add. He simply inquired if you were unattached. Franklin told him you've been married to that schoolhouse for so long they're practically inseparable. How flattering, Abigail said dryly. Well, you can't blame us for worrying, dear. A woman alone, it isn't natural. And York Lancaster would be quite a catch. A gentleman farmer with education and means. Eliza leaned closer. You're not getting any younger, Abigail. Thank you for that reminder, Eliza. Abigail began gathering her things pointedly. If that's all, you haven't answered my question. Are you going to dinner with him? I declined his invitation. Eliza's face fell. But why? Surely you don't intend to live out your days alone in that little cottage. The question struck closer to home than Abigail cared to admit. My living arrangements are my own concern, Eliza. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have papers to grade. After Eliza left, Abigail sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. She withdrew the book from her drawer, running her fingers over its leather binding. It had been so long since anyone had given her a gift simply for pleasure rather than practicality. That evening, as twilight descended over Sweetwater, Abigail found herself standing before her wardrobe, fingering the one good dress she kept for special occasions, a deep green silk that she'd ordered from a catalog 3 years ago and worn exactly twice, both times for school graduation ceremonies. This is ridiculous, she told herself firmly. You declined his invitation. Nevertheless, 20 minutes later, she was hurrying down the boardwalk toward the Sweetwater Hotel, her heart hammering against her ribs like a schoolgirl's. She told herself she was merely returning his book, that politeness demanded she do so in person, and explain that such gifts were inappropriate. The hotel dining room was half full when she arrived, mostly with traveling salesmen and the occasional local couple celebrating a special occasion. York sat alone at a corner table, his attention on a newspaper. He wore a proper suit rather than ranch clothes, his hair neatly combed, and Abigail was struck again by how handsome he was, not in the fresh-faced way of youth, but with the settled confidence of a man who had weathered life's storms and emerged intact. He looked up as if sensing her presence, and the smile that transformed his face made her breath catch. Mrs. Barstow. He rose immediately, setting aside his paper. I had almost given up hope. I came to return your book, Mr. Lancaster. She held out the volume, still wrapped in its brown paper. While I appreciate the gesture, I cannot accept such a personal gift. His smile dimmed slightly, but he nodded. Of course. I apologize if I overstepped. He gestured to the chair across from him. Since you're here, would you consider joining me anyway? The roast beef is surprisingly good. Abigail hesitated, acutely aware of curious glances from other diners. I don't think that would be appropriate. Because of town gossip? His direct gaze challenged her. Or because you're afraid? I beg your pardon. She drew herself up straighter. I am not afraid of anything, Mr. Lancaster. Aren't you? His voice softened. I think you're afraid of the same thing I was for many years, of taking a chance on happiness when you've grown comfortable with its absence. The accuracy of his observation left her momentarily speechless. Before she could recover, he continued. One meal, Mrs. Barstow. If you find my company intolerable, I promise not to trouble you again. Perhaps it was the sincerity in his eyes, or perhaps it was simple curiosity, but Abigail found herself settling into the chair he held for her. Very well. One meal. One meal turned into 3 hours of conversation that flowed with surprising ease. York told her of his Virginia childhood, his complicated relationship with the South's peculiar institution that had led him to free his inherited slaves against his father's wishes, the horrors of war that still sometimes haunted his dreams. In return, Abigail shared stories of her own Pennsylvania upbringing, her brief but happy marriage to James, her struggle to build a life alone in the frontier town that had become her home. Why didn't you ever remarry? York asked as they lingered over coffee. Surely there were suitors. Abigail considered the question. A few, in the early years. But I had my students, my independence. Marriage would have meant giving up teaching. She traced the rim of her cup, and none of them were James. York nodded thoughtfully. My wife, Caroline, died in childbirth in '62, along with our son. In the middle of war, surrounded by death. Somehow that loss felt the most senseless. I'm sorry, Abigail said softly. For years afterward, I compared every woman to her memory, York continued. It wasn't fair to them, or to me. Eventually, I stopped looking altogether. His gaze met hers. Until recently, the implications of his words hung between them. Abigail broke the silence first. Mr. Lancaster, York, please. York. The name felt intimate on her tongue. Whatever you're seeking, I'm afraid I can't provide it. I'm too old for romance. His brow furrowed. Why do you keep saying that? Age has nothing to do with the capacity to feel, doesn't it? I'm set in my ways. I have routines, habits, as do I. He leaned forward. Abigail, may I speak plainly? The use of her given name startled her, but she nodded. When I first saw you in the mercantile, something happened that I hadn't experienced in over 20 years. It was like recognition, as if I'd been waiting to find you without knowing I was searching. His hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers. I'm not a fanciful man. I've lived too long and seen too much for romantic notions. But I know my own mind, and I know what I felt. You can't possibly know me well enough to feel anything meaningful, she protested. Perhaps not, but I'd like the chance to try. His fingers gently covered hers. All I'm asking is that you don't dismiss the possibility because you believe you're too old for love. No one is too old for love, Abigail. It's the one thing that makes sense of all the rest. The warmth of his hand on hers sent an unfamiliar flutter through her chest. I should go? It's getting late. York withdrew his hand and nodded. May I walk you home? The night air had grown chilly, and Abigail was grateful for York's coat, which he'd insisted on draping around her shoulders despite her protests. They walked in comfortable silence for several blocks, the gaslights casting long shadows across the empty streets. Thank you for dinner, Abigail said as they approached her cottage. It was unexpected. In a good way, I hope. York's smile was visible in the moonlight. Yes, she admitted. Though I still think you're mistaken about what you believe you feel. They had reached her gate. York turned to face her, his expression serious. Abigail, I've spent most of my life making calculated decisions, weighing risks, considering outcomes. But some things can't be calculated. Some things you just know. He hesitated, then added softly. I've waited my whole life for you. I just didn't know it until I saw you. The simple declaration stole her breath. That's impossible. You can't know such a thing after one dinner. Can't I? His hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. Then explain why, after all these years of solitude, you suddenly feel it too. Before she could deny it, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. A kiss so gentle it might have been the touch of a butterfly's wings, yet it sent warmth cascading through her entire body. When he pulled away, Abigail found herself speechless, emotions she'd long buried rising to the surface like spring flowers breaking through snow. Good night, Abigail. York stepped back, returning her space to her. I won't push. Take all the time you need to consider. I'll be here when you're ready. She watched him walk away, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. Over the next few weeks, York made good on his promise not to push. He didn't call at her home or attempt to escort her from school. Instead, their paths crossed naturally in the small town, at Sunday services, where he sat across the aisle and tipped his hat respectfully, at the mercantile, where he helped her reach a high shelf without being asked, outside the post office, where they exchanged brief but pleasant conversation about the weather and her students' progress. Each encounter left Abigail more confused than the last. Part of her, the practical schoolmarm who had built a life of quiet independence, insisted that romance at her age was foolish, that York's interest would eventually wane when he realized she wasn't the woman he'd imagined. But another part, a part she'd thought long dormant, quickened at his presence, wondering what it might be like to have someone to share her thoughts with, her meals, her bed. The town, predictably, buzzed with speculation. Eliza Wilson made a point of mentioning York's name in every conversation. Vera openly encouraged Abigail to stop overthinking and start living. Even her students had taken notice, giggling behind their readers when York happened to ride past the schoolhouse. It was Martha Stillwell who finally broke through Abigail's defenses nearly a month after that fateful dinner. You know he comes in every week asking if you need anything delivered, Martha said casually as Abigail selected sewing thread. Never says it directly, of course, but his eyes search the store like he's hoping you'll materialize between the flour and the molasses. Mr. Lancaster is simply being neighborly, Abigail replied, though the thought of him asking after her sent a warm current through her chest. Martha snorted. Neighborly? The man rode 15 miles in a thunderstorm last week because Tommy Wilson mentioned your roof was leaking. Abigail's head snapped up. He what? Fixed your roof while you were at school. Didn't want to bother you about it. Martha's knowing smile grew wider. That's not neighborly, Abigail. That's a man in love. That's ridiculous, Abigail said automatically, though her heart had begun racing. He barely knows me. Some things don't require years of knowledge. Martha's voice softened. My Henry proposed after knowing me for 11 days. We had 37 good years before his heart gave out. She reached across the counter to squeeze Abigail's hand. Don't let fear rob you of what happiness remains, my friend. None of us knows how much time we have. That evening, Abigail sat on her front porch swing, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling air. Above, stars emerged one by one in the deepening blue of twilight. Her gaze drifted to her roof, where sure enough, the troublesome leak that had plagued her for months appeared to have been mended. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where a familiar figure on horseback approached at a leisurely pace. Her heart skipped as York spotted her and reined in his mount. Good evening, Mrs. Barstow. He removed his hat. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, she found herself saying. Would you care to sit for a while? The evening's quite pleasant. Something like surprise flashed across his features before he nodded. I'd like that. He tethered his horse to her fence post and joined her on the porch, settling into the chair adjacent to her swing. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared. Thank you for fixing my roof, Abigail said finally. York looked momentarily chagrined. I didn't mean for you to find out about that. I know how you value your independence. Independence doesn't preclude gratitude. She studied his profile in the fading light. Why did you do it? He considered the question. Because I could, and you needed it done. A slight smile touched his lips. And because I can't seem to stop thinking about your welfare, however much I tell myself to give you space. The simple honesty of his answer moved her. I've been thinking about what you said that night, she admitted. About being too old for love. York turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly intent. And I still think it's complicated. At our age, we have patterns, habits, expectations that may not align. She twisted her hands in her lap. And there's the risk. Risk of loss. The word emerged as barely more than a whisper. When James died, I thought the pain would kill me too. I don't know if I could survive that again. York was silent for a long moment. After Caroline died, I was angry for a very long time. Angry at God, at the war, at myself for not being there when she needed me. His voice grew rough with memory. For years, I thought avoiding attachment was the answer. Keep everyone at arm's length, and you can't be hurt again. What changed? I realized one day that I was already hurting, from the absence of connection, from the emptiness of days spent in solitude. His eyes found hers in the gathering darkness. The risk of loss is real, Abigail. But isn't the certainty of continued loneliness a greater cost? The question hung between them, unanswerable yet demanding response. I don't know if I remember how, she confessed. To love someone. To be loved. I think it's like riding a horse, York said gently. The body remembers, even when the mind has forgotten. Impulsively, Abigail reached out and took his hand. The warmth of his skin against hers felt right in a way she couldn't articulate. I'm afraid, she whispered. So am I. His fingers intertwined with hers. But I'm more afraid of walking away from this chance than I am of taking it. In the weeks that followed, Sweetwater witnessed a courtship unlike any in recent memory. York called formally at Abigail's cottage, bringing wildflowers and books rather than the conventional chocolates or trinkets. They were seen walking together after church, heads bent in serious conversation. He attended the spring school recital and applauded every student's performance with genuine enthusiasm. For Abigail, each day brought new discoveries. The way York's laugh started deep in his chest before emerging. How he always stepped to the street side of the boardwalk when they walked together. The gentle way he treated children and animals alike. She found herself looking forward to their meetings with an anticipation that made her feel simultaneously foolish and exhilarated. By early June, when York's nephew Travis arrived from St. Louis, a lanky boy with wary eyes and a chip on his shoulder that belied his obvious intelligence. Abigail had begun to imagine a future different from the one she'd resigned herself to. It was Travis who inadvertently pushed their courtship to its next phase. "Are you going to marry Miss Barstow?" the boy asked bluntly one evening as York prepared supper in their ranch house kitchen. York nearly dropped the pot he was holding. "What makes you ask that?" Travis shrugged, continuing to whittle the stick in his hands. "You look at her the way Pa used to look at Ma before she died. All soft, like you're seeing something no one else can see." York set the pot down carefully. "Would it bother you if I did?" The boy considered the question with surprising maturity. "Depends. Would she live here with us?" "If she agreed to marry me, yes, she would." "Would she still teach school?" "That would be her decision to make." Travis nodded slowly. "She doesn't talk to me like I'm stupid. Most adults do. Abigail has a gift for seeing people as they are." "Then I guess it would be all right." Travis resumed his whittling. "But you better ask her proper, with a ring and everything. She deserves that." The wisdom from the mouth of a 15-year-old struck York with unexpected force. "Yes," he agreed softly. "She does." The following Saturday, York arrived at Abigail's cottage with a picnic basket and a nervous energy she hadn't seen in him before. "I thought we might ride out to the river," he suggested. "It's a fine day for it." Abigail agreed, and soon they were mounted on York's horses, her side saddle on a gentle mare, him on his rangy buckskin gelding, heading east toward the winding river that cut through the rolling prairie. They followed a game trail to a secluded bend where cottonwoods provided dappled shade and wildflowers carpeted the ground in splashes of yellow and purple. York spread a blanket and unpacked a feast that put Abigail's own cooking skills to shame. Cold fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and apple pie. "Did you make all this yourself?" she asked, impressed. Travis helped. York smiled. Boy has a talent for baking, though he'd deny it if asked directly. As they ate, York spoke of his plans for the ranch, the cattle breeding program he'd started, the orchard he intended to plant, his hopes for Travis's future. Abigail found herself drawn into his vision, offering suggestions about irrigation techniques she'd read about and educational opportunities for Travis beyond what Sweetwater could provide. It wasn't until they were lingering over coffee poured from a battered tin pot that York's manner changed, becoming more serious. "Abigail," he began, setting aside his cup, "these past months have been the happiest I've known in more years than I care to count." She felt a flutter of anticipation. "For me as well. When I came to Sweetwater, I was looking for land, not love." His voice roughened on the word. "I thought that part of my life was finished, that I was too old, too set in my ways, too damaged by the past to open my heart again." He reached across the blanket to take her hand. "I was wrong." Abigail's breath caught as York shifted to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "I know it hasn't been long, by conventional standards, but at our age, perhaps we've earned the right to follow our hearts rather than convention." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "Abigail Barstow, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any Abigail had seen before, a band of gold supporting not a traditional diamond, but a deep blue sapphire flanked by smaller pearls. "It was my grandmother's," York explained, seeing her surprise. "The sapphire is for constancy, the pearls for wisdom gained through experience. I thought it seemed fitting for us." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, blurring her vision. "York, uncertainty flashed across his face. "If it's too soon, I understand. We can wait." "No." She squeezed his hand. "It's not too soon. It's just—" She took a deep breath. "I never thought I'd have this again. A chance at companionship, at love. Is that a yes?" Hope brightened his eyes. Abigail nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. York slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. Then he gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised far more than words could express. Later, as they lay side by side on the blanket watching clouds drift across the summer sky, Abigail voiced the one concern still nagging at her. "What will people say? A schoolteacher marrying after all these years? There will be talk." York chuckled, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Let them talk. They've probably been wagering on us since that first dinner at the hotel." "You're probably right." She nestled closer to his side, marveling at how natural it felt to be held by him. I just don't want Travis to face any difficulty because of me. Travis thinks you hang the moon. Said as much last week. York turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Abigail, there's something else I should tell you. Something I've been thinking about. What is it? I've been corresponding with the land agent about purchasing the Miller property that adjoins yours. It has that old stone house that needs work, but has good bones. He traced the line of her cheek with his finger. I know how much your independence and your teaching mean to you. I thought perhaps we could maintain both homes, the ranch for weekends and summers, your cottage for the school year. That way you wouldn't have to give up teaching. The thoughtfulness of his proposal, so different from what most men would expect, moved her deeply. You would do that? Live apart during the week. If it meant having you as my wife, I'd agree to far more difficult arrangements. His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Besides, I'm rather good at riding back and forth. And there would be certain advantages to having a town property as well as the ranch. The hint of desire in his voice sent a pleasant warmth through Abigail's body. York Lancaster, are you suggesting impropriety before we're even married? Absolutely not. His expression of mock offense made her laugh. I am suggesting, however, that we not delay the wedding unnecessarily. Justice of the Peace Thompson can perform the ceremony any day you name. What about Travis? And the town? Surely they'll expect. Travis wants whatever will make us happy, and the town will adjust. York's kiss silenced her further protests. Unless you've changed your mind already? No. Abigail whispered against his lips. I haven't changed my mind. I'm just adjusting to happiness. It takes some getting used to. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later on a perfect July morning, with wildflowers adorning the small church and most of Sweetwater in attendance. Vera stood as Abigail's witness, while Travis, standing tall and proud beside his uncle, held the rings. When Justice Thompson asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was broken only by Eliza Wilson's audible sniffling and Martha Stillwell's whispered, "It's about time." As they exchanged vows, Abigail marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young widow convinced her chance at love had passed, to a woman embarking on a new chapter she'd never dared imagine. York's hands were steady as he slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke the words that bound them together. I, York, take you, Abigail, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. When it was her turn, Abigail's voice rang clear through the church, free of the doubts that had plagued her for so long. I, Abigail, take you, York, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, Justice Thompson intoned, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. York's kiss was gentle, yet thorough enough to elicit a few chuckles from the congregation and a wolf whistle that sounded suspiciously like it came from Travis's direction. The celebration afterwards spilled from the church onto the grounds, with tables laden with food contributed by every household in town. Children played tag between the adults' legs, dogs snatched fallen scraps, and even the most stalwart bachelors found themselves tapping their feet to the fiddle music that rose above the general merriment. As twilight approached, York found Abigail sitting apart from the festivities, watching the dancers with a contented smile. Ready to go home, Mrs. Lancaster? He asked, extending his hand. The name, her new name, still felt novel on her ears, but the rightness of it settled in her chest like a warm ember. Yes, she said, placing her hand in his. I'm ready. They slipped away with minimal fanfare, thanks to Travis's orchestrated distraction involving a barrel of lemonade and a purportedly escaped snake. York's buggy awaited them, festooned with ribbons and a crudely painted just married sign that made Abigail laugh despite her blush. As they drove toward the stone house York had spent weeks preparing, new roof, fresh plaster, gleaming windows, Abigail leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching the western sky turn to fire with the setting sun. Having second thoughts? York asked, noticing her pensive expression. Not a single one. She smiled up at him. I was just thinking about what you said that night at dinner, that you'd waited your whole life for me. I meant it. He guided the horses around a bend in the road. Everything that came before, every joy and sorrow, every triumph and mistake, led me to you. How could I regret any of it when the path brought me here? Abigail thought of her own journey, the young bride she'd been, the widow she'd become, the independent woman she'd forged herself into over long, sometimes lonely years. Each version of herself had been necessary to create the woman who could recognize the gift York offered and find the courage to accept it. I suppose I was waiting too, she said softly. I just didn't know it until you said those words. York reined the horses to a stop atop a small rise. Below them, their stone house waited, warm light spilling from its windows into the gathering dusk. But instead of continuing, he set the brake and turned to face her fully. Abigail Lancaster, he said, her new name spoken with a reverence that made her heart swell. I promise you this. Whatever years remain to us, whether many or few, I will cherish every moment. I will honor your independence even as I delight in our partnership. I will respect your mind as I adore your heart. His hand cupped her cheek. And I will thank God every day for bringing me to Sweetwater and to you. As his lips met hers beneath the first stars of evening, Abigail surrendered the last of her doubts. Age had nothing to do with love, she realized. Love existed outside of time, waiting to be recognized by hearts brave enough to risk opening once more. And in that moment, with York's arms around her and their future stretching before them like the endless Wyoming sky, Abigail knew that some journeys were worth waiting a lifetime to begin.